Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, coming to you from Peanuts Truck Stop here in Brooklyn, New York. And don't worry, listeners, I got out of my chains, but I am now being held hostage by an alien from another planet. Just wanted to let you know, but I'm not alone on the airwaves. Who is with me today?
Well, I'm Steve Guntley, and eat this, scrotum head. This is the podcast that's all about tiny women in jars, crawling fungus, and turd helmets. And that's because this is a podcast about Bad Channels, another early full moon comedy sci-fi romp from Ted Nicolau. Now, real quick before we get started, I wanted to clarify. Jared, you texted me this morning saying that you predicted exactly what my intro line was going to be. How close did you get?
I was pretty close. It was not the exact line, but it shares the candor of the line that you did choose. So I feel like it was somewhat of a win. I wasn't perfectly on, but I was telegraphing where you were going to go with this one.
You registered that my juvenile sense of humor and knew which one I would seize upon. So we've really been having hive mind moments a lot lately. So yeah, I just wanted to see if that was still happening. But we are very excited to be talking about Bad Channels, and even more excited because we've got a super cool guest here with us today. Someone we've been trying to get together with forever, and I keep introducing scheduling errors, and I apologize for that. But Jared, who is with us today?
Oh, I'm so excited. I want to say when this show was a little seedling, just getting started, Steve and I sat down and we scribbled down a very short list of 5 to 10 potential guests if we were thought far enough in the future to even be having guests on the show. And this person was one of the people whose name was on my very first short list of potential guests. You will know her as a podcaster and a writer who focuses on film, primarily horror movies and the 1990s. She's 1/3 of the Amazing Dream Warriors, who often do a lot of work with the Evolution of Horror podcast. I can only be talking about Becky Darke. Becky, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much. It's really, really nice to be here. And yes, we've finally done it. We've finally connected over the airwaves.
Turns out it's really hard to coordinate schedules across multiple time zones and an ocean, and that's largely my fault. I apologize. I really appreciate you being flexible with us. I started a new
glad
job.
that
My
you're
whole life's
showing
been getting a
some
little
accountability,
chaotic.
Steve, for once.
Hey, I'm sorry. I'm introducing a lot of chaos.
We're all busy weirdos, it's not easy to get those schedules together, but here we are. So I'm so excited. Thank you.
We're so excited to have you here. Absolutely. And excited to talk about this movie, which has kind of been floating around back of mind. I've seen this poster come up a lot. It's been mentioned as one of those movies that's kind of a little quiet linchpin of a lot of this shared universe kind of thing that Charles Band is doing. I think having watched that might be overstated, but I still had a really fun time with this movie. I'm curious why you wanted to talk specifically about Bad Channels.
So I'm going to interject for a second. So in fairness to Becky, because it would be misleading if we said she chose this movie on her own.
Oh, okay.
I
fair.
suggested this movie to
was a
Becky, and she
suggestion.
was a good sport about it. And here are the reasons why.
Okay, I'm excited to hear the reasons why, because I was watching it and I was like, how should I feel about the fact that Jared said that this was the one that I should do?
Here I am to address
Well, we know that you're 12
very
inches high and you live in a jar, so we just thought it might relate to you. Yeah.
So I was thinking about it, and Becky, one of my favorite things about listening to you collaborate with Mike and Stevie and everyone else on all the Evolution of Horror and related shows is you like to throw around the word mental when you're talking about movies, which I thoroughly appreciate. It's a word that we don't use enough over here to describe the state of the choices made sometimes in movies. And I thought, what is a movie that's going to get her to say this movie is mental? And then here's my other reasoning. We have this pesky little explicit rating under the description of our show. But really, Steve and I, when we're talking about the movies, we don't do it on purpose, but we tend to generally keep it relatively PG-13 rated. I want someone who can throw around some F-bombs with conviction. I want to earn that explicit rating. And I thought, who have I listened to on a podcast who can so eloquently drop F-bombs, much to the distress of the some of the characters in the movie we just watched. Who could do that? And Becky, you came to mind, so please don't be offended.
I am delighted. I've always sworn like a sailor, much to my parents' chagrin. And we've had comments on, like, Mike Munzer, who obviously does Evolution of Horror, and I'm on the Dream Warriors with him. We've had comments, and with Brad Hansen as well, who we do Fresh Blood with, saying that there are certain guests that he has that are a bad influence, and whenever those guests are on his show, the swearing goes through the roof. And on Instagram, he put out like a little kind of question to his followers saying, who do you think these people would be? And one of them was me. And I was like, yeah, I have to hold my hands up. I'm a filthy mouthed little woman. And, it's like I punctuate all my sentences with the word fuck, and I can't help that. I'm 41 now. There's no way I'm getting out of the habit.
I mean, you're probably going to get this whole Polka station shut down. We're really in danger of losing our Polka network.
Listeners, no matter what a voice might tell you, do not turn off this podcast.
I could not stop laughing when you get to the bit in the film and he drops the F-bomb over the airwaves. Dan drops the F-bomb. And they are all so shocked. All of this carnage that has been happening throughout this entire film with mold and women in tiny jars and God knows what. And all of a sudden he says fuck on the airwaves and they all lose their shit. I just thought it was so funny. Call the FCC.
And this is a movie I'd seen before, and my memory of it, while spotty, really, it was these reasons that made me think that you would be the perfect person for this episode.
Well, and my nickname is Bunny, and there's a character called Bunny in the film, which I was also delighted by.
Which I made that connection today, earlier today, revisiting the movie, and I go, I didn't even think about that in the first place. But you referred to us earlier, I think off mic before we got started, as being just some kind of weirdos. I forget exactly what. And when you by us, busy I mean the three of us, busy weirdos. Not just me and Steve, although maybe you meant just me and Steve, but you referred to the three of us that way. And I think to have taken a path in your life that brought you to talking about bad channels on a podcast just illustrates what kind of weirdo path you might have chose in your life. So, Becky, I know you love horror. You're really knowledgeable. You've been on a number of shows and written a number of pieces about different genres and movies. Was it something that you picked up as a kid? Like, were you always into it, or was it something that, like, how did your taste for horror movies and stuff form when you were younger?
Yeah, I've only got myself to blame. It's been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. I feel like it is just kind of written into my DNA by this point. I started watching horror when I was a kid. I was young, man. I was probably 9 or 10 when I really realised, I guess, that this was a genre that I got so much out of. My household was very much a film household. So my mum specifically was really into movies. She wasn't kind of like, like cinematically educated or anything. She wasn't a scholar on it, but she just really loved films, and kind of that was something that we did very much as a family. We had so many, VHS tapes that we had pirated off the TV, all with their neat little labels, kind of all, lined up on the shelf.
Oh, yeah.
And, Saturdays, Sundays, evenings, it would just be like, okay, so what are we putting on now? And it was quite often... so my mum wasn't really into horror. I watched a lot of horror with my dad. But my mum loved like an adventure film. She loved sci-fi. She loved action. So, I mean, I was born in 82. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. So I watched a lot of stuff like, Indiana Jones and Star Wars and Terminator 2 and Die Hard and all of this stuff, these sort of big blockbusters. But what I kind of realized once I got a TV in my bedroom, which I was relatively young, was, you could put on Channel 4 or something in the UK and there were often horror films on. And I really they connected with me on that sort of really thrilling level. So I realized, even if it wasn't kind of consciously, that I was getting this this reaction to these films, this kind of thrill, this adrenaline rush out of being scared. And, now people ask me what I do and I say that I'm a journalist, I'm a podcaster, I'm a writer. Oh, what do you write about? What do you podcast about? Horror films. And so often you get this look of horror on their faces, but not for the right reason, because they say, oh, I can't watch horror, it scares me. And I'm like, yeah, dude, that's the point. Of course.
I can't go on that roller coaster, it's fast.
Yeah, exactly. And that feeling of fear and of kind of feeling unsafe but safe, under the covers in your bedroom or on the sofa in your living room, is something that I've always loved. And I'm always kind of like chasing that dragon, as I think so many horror fans are, of trying to find the fear, trying to find that film that is going to really kind of mess you up. Or like this one, that's just going to be a lot of bonkers fun.
Yeah.
Becky, what was that movie for you? What was the first one that sort of like really affected you?
I think it was Amityville Horror, the 70s, the 70s version.
Yeah.
As I say, it was one that was just kind of on Channel 4 or BBC 2 when I was a kid. And when I was younger, the sorts of horror that I gravitated towards were very much like occult and kind of ghost stories. So things like slashers, I actually didn't start watching until I was sort of in my mid to late teens. When I was a kid, I loved hauntings and I loved like possession films and kind of demonic storylines. And I watched the Amityville Horror, and there was something about like the scene with the flies, like going all over the priest, the walls kind of oozing that green sludge, the possession of the father and him kind of acting in such a different way to how he was at the beginning of the film. And they first move into this house, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. But I remember being genuinely terrified. And I watch it today, and it's still one of my favorite ghost films. I know that it doesn't have a huge fan base, but I think it's pretty good.
Well, James Brolin in his underwear is pretty terrifying. So.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Bad Channels. I've got some stats I'm going to rattle off here for you.
Fire them off.
Bad Channels was released June 25th, 1992. It's directed by our old buddy Ted Nicolau, and it's written by Charles Band and Jackson Barr. And it stars Paul Hipp, Martha Quinn, Aaron Lustig, Ian Patrick Williams, Charlie Spradling, Robert Factor, and Sonny Carl Davis. So I think a lot of the amount of notoriety this film has, if it has any at all, I think is because of its soundtrack. I think, would that be fair to say? This is a Blue Oyster Cult score. Like, they don't really have any original songs in this movie, but they're doing the score for this entire film.
It's really interesting that that's the way that it went here. It was like Blue Oyster Cult are scoring this movie, but then they're bringing in these sort of unknown rock bands to do these musical numbers throughout the movie. And I have a friend who sent me a photo, someone who keeps up with the show and knows kind of what we're recording and what we're doing in the future, who sent me a photo of their hard copy in their hand of the CD of the soundtrack of Bad Channels.
Oh,
what
yeah,
a
that's
treasure.
right. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I mean, so Ted Nicolau was reluctant to do this movie because the movie that he made prior to this was Subspecies, and then the movie he made prior to that was a movie called Terror Vision, which has a very, very similar premise to this film. That's just basically like swap out television for radio, and that's kind of a similar idea. And so I think he was a little reluctant to be repeating himself. But, I think he got talked into the idea when he realized he could be making fake music videos. And I think he clearly is having the most fun when he's doing that. There are 3 moments in this movie where it kind of breaks into like a hallucinatory music video sequence where the bands on the soundtrack actually walk out into the world of this the world of the movie and entrance a certain young woman and then zap her into another dimension, basically. And these are definitely like the meat of the movie, and I think the most fun parts of this entire film. But yeah, I had a hard time finding much content about this movie, strangely enough. Like, this is a movie that like I've heard about. It's come up a lot, like in my reading and in talking to a lot of people on this show as kind of a favorite or as kind of one of the important movies in the Full Moon lore. But really, like, there doesn't seem to have left as much of an imprint as I thought. Like, not a lot of content on it. In the Dave J's book, Came from the Video Aisle, didn't really have a lot of content mentioned about it. Charlie Band didn't really talk too much about it in his autobiography. So it feels like it's a little bit of a Full Moon footnote.
Well, it is at this point now, because it should be noted that like we approach these things in hindsight and we look back on them and we bring a different perspective to it now. And obviously there were fans of movies that Full Moon was putting out at the time, but this was at a time when Full Moon movies were still being like critically reviewed. Like, critics kind of eventually just stopped. Like, they were like, a lot of these movies aren't worth our time. But this was one that when their Full Moon movies, even though they were being put out straight to video, were still being reviewed. And this was one that just got terrible reviews. People didn't really care for it. They didn't get it. They didn't think it was fun. They didn't think the music was good enough. They didn't think the movie was silly enough for how ridiculous the premise is. Like, there wasn't enough jokes in it, I think, was something that one way a lot of people felt about it. So it's not shocking to me that it's become a bit of a footnote. Another reason why I feel like this movie in particular maybe doesn't have as much retrospective attention as others is that there have been Full Moon movies that have been remastered in the last few years, because when moving from Paramount Studios, they recovered negatives and things of movies and were able to remaster them and make them look quite beautiful. A few weeks ago, we talked about a movie called Netherworld, which was remastered recently for a Blu-ray release from its negative, and it looks fantastic compared to the standard def version that you get on a lot of the streaming services. But apparently the original film of Bad Channels does not exist anymore, or is unable to locate. And so Full Moon has basically come out and just said, this is never going to get remastered. It's never going to get a Blu-ray release. Because if we made a Blu-ray release of this, all we would be doing is using the DVD, trying to remaster the DVD rip, and it would just look even worse. And so this is one that is going to just linger in that standard def world, which I think is unfortunate, because when I was watching it, I was just like, part of me was wishing that I could see a really pristine cut of what this would have looked like had there been the film negative for it to be seen theatrically. Now, it wasn't seen theatrically because it was straight to video, but it wasn't shot on video. And I was like, I want to know what this looked like.
I am going to argue against that, because I think standard def is this movie's friend.
I don't disagree with that, but I want to see it anyway.
Yeah, not being able to see all the details on some of these wonky little aliens and robots is probably working in its favor. I mean, it's all part of the fun with this, but like, even in silhouette, these aliens look chintzy. Like, you can tell, like, right from the get-go, you see a silhouette of this thing and you're like, wait, is he dragging like one of those little popper toys that you had in preschool? Like, what is he dragging here? And what is wrong with his head? It looks like he's Frank from the movie Frank. He's just wearing a big like head over his head, and
there's the other alien too, who I referred to myself and in my notes as Johnny 4.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, And like the weird, it turns into kind of like a Audrey 2 sort of rip, you know.
That's
in
what
the
I
end.
put in my notes. I was like, yeah, it's like a kind of the redheaded stepchild of Audrey 2.
Yeah, it's like Audrey 2 with like Doc Brown's hair, like it's like
Yeah.
sticking out and all this wild, like it looks really goofy. I mean, it's all part of the fun. I think so many you read some of the reviews of this movie at the time, and people are just ripping this movie to hell. And I'm just like, man, you really kind of missed that they're very self-aware. Like they're very aware of the tone of this movie and what they're doing here. And I think people are reviewing it as if it's being done at face value, and that's just not really the way it is.
Yeah. I think that's very unfair. I had a really good time with it. Like I don't have a history with this film at all. I'd never seen it before watching it for the podcast. And I didn't really know what to expect. But I really it's really good fun. And I don't think the fact that it hasn't got a lot of broad comedy is a particular downfall for it. I think you're right. Like it doesn't take itself too seriously. It's very self-aware. And everybody who's in it seems to be they seem to be pretty committed. Like nobody's kind of dialing it in. Everybody seems to just be there for a good time. And I came away from it. Sometimes you can watch this stuff and it can feel a bit cynical. And I didn't get that with this at all. Like I thought it did exactly what it needed to do to entertain for 88 minutes. I thought it was good.
Absolutely. No, I'm with you. And like we've talked on this show, like actually with Netherworld pretty recently, we talked about how often the male leads of full moon movies are really unengaging or just bland, just kind of functionaries. I thought Paul Hipp as Dangerous Dan O'Dare is pretty fun in this movie. Like he's committed. You believe that he's panicked. He's really embracing this kind of Howard Stern shock jock sort of vibe. And he's like a trained theater actor. He's still working quite a bit today. He's definitely one of those guys who's still around. And
so if you guys will indulge me for a moment, I have a weird anecdote involving Paul Hipp, which is that when I was about 10 years old, we went to see Buddy the Buddy Holly story on Broadway.
Oh, okay.
With Paul Hipp as Buddy Holly.
Oh my God, I can so see that casting. That makes perfect sense.
And I didn't really make the connection at the time because I didn't know who he was, but his performance as Buddy Holly was really well received. He was nominated for a Tony for Best Actor, whatever the main category for that would be. But I remember it really well because we had some kind of souvenir book from the show or playbill that might have been signed.
Oh, wow.
Because we went to, I remember going to the show really distinctly, but the reason I remember it distinctly isn't for his performance or isn't for that it was the Buddy Holly story, but the day that we went, we walked out of the theater and it was nighttime and we were in like the Times Square area, and on the like Times Square news feed thing was the breaking news that the U.S. had just bombed Iraq, and it was the beginning of the liberation of Kuwait in Operation Desert Storm. And we walked out, we read that. People were kind of on the street reading it, looking at each other like, is that good? Is that bad? Like, we don't really know what to think of this. And there was this weird feeling of like, are we going to war right now? Like, what's happening? And I think me, my parents, everyone just completely forgot that we had been in a play. Like, I could not tell you a single detail about it, but I could tell you the day that was, because I went back and I was like, well, what was the day? It was January 17th, 1991. Yeah. And that was when Paul Hipp was playing Buddy Holly on Broadway. So I potentially got an autographed playbill from him on the day we bombed Iraq. That's my anecdote. Yeah, it was, I don't want to indulge and go too far off topic on the show very often, but I could not help when I was doing some reading about Paul Hipp. All of a sudden, all of these memories started coming back to me about having gone to this show. And it definitely was him in the lead. I looked at the years he was in the lead, and it was him playing Buddy Holly. And so I don't know. Maybe I met this guy.
Right? He's got that. he's perfect casting as like a rock and roll DJ. Like he's he's very cool. He's handsome. He's got that kind of like rocker, but kind of clean, like slightly clean cut rocker, where he's even though he's meant to be one of the most controversial DJs in the US.
I love that. I love the idea of what media thinks controversial radio DJs are, because they're always the most like buttoned up, tame people. Like I think of the really stupid shock jock guy from Halloween 6.
Yes.
Like, it's like you don't for a minute, like when we have Sterns and Imuses in real life, the version of this that we get in movies, it's like the fact that it was this huge deal for him to drop an F-bomb one time is just like, oh my God.
But he's been suspended by the FCC for live broadcasting his sexual relations with a traffic cop. I mean, come on.
I would tune in. I don't know. That's all I'm saying. I would listen to that.
It's just one of those characterizations. It's always so false to me. Like whenever you see like a radio DJ character in a lot of things, it's always like they do it right in some movies, but it's usually just sort of like, and I feel like they kind of get it right here more so than in other movies. It's always kind of like this loser who you're like, this is not the person I would go to for my like rock and roll recommendations, or expect like legitimate lewd behavior from.
I mean, this movie kind of crystallizes this time in the early 90s in such an interesting way because, this was kind of the rise of the shock jock. This was probably when Howard Stern was really starting to get into national or international even prominence, as this guy who like, oh my God, he just really goes there. He can't be tamed. He's this wild man. So like that idea was pretty fresh and pretty new. And then you have the music, which is, I mean, this is prime grunge era. Like this is Nirvana's It Smells Like Teen Spirit just came out. Pearl Jam is doing their thing. Like it's grunge is very much the mainstream thing, and all the underground bands around this time are trying to do some kind of weird artsy riff on grunge.
the
that's
grunge
very much
band,
what you get here.
The grunge band is so funny because they're playing in a gymnasium. It's almost like the Up With People version of the Smells Like Teen Spirit video.
Yeah, kinda, yeah.
It's like instead of kids moshing, it's a marching band.
But then you get like the band Fair Game, which is the first one you see, and it's like the last dying gasps of hair metal from the 80s.
Yeah.
That was still kind of 1992 was that sort of crossover time when guys like that were in their last little dying breath, and then guys like DMT and Psychotic Symphony, spelled the most insane way you can possibly imagine, are sort of the up and coming or the more shocking, more interesting rock bands.
It kind of makes sense that they have the bands in that order in the movie, actually. Like
it
even
does.
kind of chronologically in terms of sort of musical history, it's like this kind of sort of this taking over as the film goes on. I like it.
It's gradually getting more insane as the movie goes along.
Yeah.
And I would argue, I mean, look, the Psychotic Symphony bit with the men in masks, the clown masks and everything like that is truly bizarre and a really standout moment.
It's so surreal. Yeah, definitely. I love that they put in 3 basically music videos to just really pad out the runtime of this movie. They're like, they don't even, because obviously they're hallucinations by the women who are about to be abducted. I love it when you come out of the music video and you've got the perspective of the other people in the scene who are just watching these girls like writhe around to themselves to this music that's just in their heads. But they don't sort of clip it at all. It's like, no, this is a full song all 3 times.
Absolutely.
I would love to know, like, this film would have been about 70 minutes if it wasn't for those 3 sequences.
It absolutely would. And we talked about this a bit on again to bring up Netherworld, because that's a movie that came out like practically the same time as this one. This was the time when Full Moon was really trying to pimp out their record label, which was called Moonstone Records. So they've got Blue Oyster Cult and these kind of bands that are sort of weird and potentially up and coming on the Bad Channel soundtrack. then they've got like Edgar Winter and like Bon Jovi on the Netherworld
David
soundtrack.
Bryan, yeah.
David Bryan, yeah, not Bon Jovi himself, but like a band member from Bon Jovi. So they're trying to break out into this little space as well, just so Charlie Band can say that he's had his thumbs in every form of media at this point.
Totally. And Steve, if you think about it, like we're getting the stuff from Moonstone Records sold to us along with other Full Moon merch. Who's selling us that merch? Who's our good friend who pops it in for a brief role in this movie?
Well, that would be the lovely, the stunning, the beautiful Sonny Carl David. No, Charlie Spradling, who this surprisingly, for as important and outsized a role as Charlie Spradling has in kind of the Full Moon fans oeuvre overall, like this is her last Full Moon film. This is it. We've covered all of Charlie Spradling's Full Moon films.
I know, crazy to think.
It's Puppet Master 2, it's Meridian, it's this. So we get no more Spradling on this show, which is a bummer because she's not even really in this one very much. She is the first person who gets taken and put into the little jar, and we never even really get a close-up of her face or anything. She just kind of becomes part of this music video and then disappears.
Yeah, sad to see her go.
Charlie Spradling, fantastic. She is for people who haven't listened to earlier episodes, she became the Full Moon spokeslady for a while. She would end up all the video zones by talking about merch and things like that. And just a fun personality. She's really great.
Charlie, if for some reason you are listening to this episode, contact us at puppetmasterscastlephreks@gmail.com because we would love to have you on at some point.
And
I love the girls' names in this movie. They're called Cookie, Ginger, and Bunny. It's like
60% of the Spice Girls.
There's no kind of like Jane or Karen, you know.
Right, yeah. The one normal name we get is Lisa, and she's worth mentioning too because Lisa's played by Martha Quinn, who, if you're around our age, you might remember as an MTV VJ.
Right.
One of the very first from when MTV launched. And she does she does say the words on the air and give a little wink at the camera, which was very knowing. But I appreciated that. She was definitely a fixture in an early part of my life, those early years of MTV when it was a really big thing that our culture was doing together watching those videos.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and the video zone for this is really bizarre, and it focuses a lot on her and like cutting back and forth between her and Aaron Lustig, who plays the nebbishy station owner. And he just keeps doing these weird kind of creepy bits that seem to be like the way they're editing the video zone. I don't think they're in the same room, but they're editing it to make her look like he's making her uncomfortable. And it's just a very bizarre kind of vibe.
It's a weird choice.
I don't know what this guy's deal is, but he clearly is trying to be the kind of the cut up of the video zone. But he's kind of styled in this movie like like he's like the principal in a Fruit by the Foot commercial who wants to stop the kids from having fun or something. I don't know. He's got that kind of energy. I don't know. Like I can't think of a better way to put it.
I want to see that description on a casting call. Like we want you to have real like put upon principle energy. Like have you ever seen a Fruit by the Foot or like a Yike Stripes fruit stripe gum commercial?
We want to cast somebody who really is mad that kids are drinking Sunny D. Yeah, absolutely. we want somebody who gets personally offended by that. But I mean, so there's just so much fun stuff here. We never really learn what this alien wants necessarily. It doesn't really have an overall master plan, other than just like to seemingly kidnap beautiful women as pets, like literally keeping them as pets. Because at one point they accidentally capture a dorky teenage boy and they don't want him. Like they're immediately like, no, we don't want this thing.
No, the creepy guy who is completely obsessed with Bunny, the guy from the band, who at one point is, when she is sort of sexily dancing and like gyrating to the grunge band in the gym, he is wanking off his own trombone.
It's very subtle. I think most
the song itself is very subtle.
Yes.
I believe the lyrics to the song are just "I'm touching myself." Like they just say it over and over again.
Yeah.
Yeah, the divinals eat your heart out.
Yes, exactly. But one of the other important things to talk about with this movie is sort of a failed attempt to cross this over with like an extended universe. You know, Charles Band, obviously we've talked about it before. He's a very big fan of Marvel Comics, and he loves the way that their characters just cross over and like have this big collective shared universe. And he was trying to build that out. And one of the movies that they made following this was trying to capitalize on that. It was called Dollman versus Demonic Toys, obviously crossing over those two early Full Moon movies. And this movie also crosses over, but not in the way that they intended. All right, so when this movie ends, all of the girls have been freed from their jars and returned to normal size, except for Bunny, the teenage airhead. You know, she's the only one who is still 12 inches tall and stuck in a jar. And so the reason for that was that she was supposed to carry over into Dollman versus Demonic Toys and be kind of a new sidekick and love interest for Dollman, who, as we all know, is just a little guy. But something broke down in the negotiations for some reason, like that actress didn't want to come back. And so the actual tiny love interest that's in Dollman versus Demonic Toys is Melissa Bear, a.k.a. Nurse Ginger from this movie. So even though she is restored to her normal size at the end, she is the one who is still shrunk down in Dollman versus Demonic Toys.
As Ginger?
As Nurse Ginger. Yeah, she's...
Okay.
So there is still that connective tissue. It's just not the way they intended it to go. And I think if you're watching it, you might be a little confused of what happened.
She's like, I don't want to go back to nursing. I liked being 12 inches tall in a jar. Hook me up with a little demonic toy, please.
Absolutely. I was dancing with all these weird clown guys, and then I got real small. Like, what's the problem?
She realized her true passion was gyrating.
Right. And who can blame her?
Yeah, no, that's a 4-year program, too, so it's hard to get
That is a funny scene, though, like Becky mentioned before, when they come out of the sort of sensory, like, pull of the music, I guess, and they get snapped back into the real world. The way that she's still dancing in that moment while everyone else is sort of just trying to do their job is really funny to me.
It's really good. It's really good. I love that. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, yeah, so much of the action of this movie is just kind of like a Boy Who Cried Wolf situation, you know, because Dangerous Dan is so known for his wacky stunts, which apparently are so wacky they need to devote the entire evening newscast to footage of a newscaster watching a TV of a radio show. Like, talk about a slow fucking news day. My God.
Listen, I don't know what goes on in small towns, man.
Oh, I mean, I can tell you it's mostly just meth. It's not this. It's mostly just the cooking and using of methamphetamines. But
that explains a fair amount about this movie.
It actually does explain quite a bit. No, but I mean, yeah, everybody is just riveted by this guy's antics, including like a very visual bit where he chains himself up. And people need to call in. It's like, he didn't need to actually chain himself up. He could have just been rattling chains like he's doing a fucking like a NPR version of the Christmas Story, you know? But then, like, he doesn't need to be doing anything.
Because then he wouldn't have been able to convince this town's version of Perd Hapley to send Lisa, you know, to cover the story. And that was really what this was all about, this was just a guise to get her down to the station because he's, you know, he's got a little crush.
Yeah. And then, but ultimately, when the aliens start invading and start taking over the station, it is just Dan commenting on the action the entire time and trying to convince people to stop listening to the show. And I don't know about y'all, I don't think I'd be able to stop listening to that show. Like, if it sounded like this guy was having this weird breakdown on the radio, I would be more inclined to listen to it.
Yeah, without a doubt.
His turn it off is pretty good. It's not Tom Atkins level, but it's approaching.
It's approaching.
I can appreciate that about it.
No, he was going for it. You know, but really, like, it's a testament to Paul Hibb and like the performance that he gives, that he manages to keep this character engaging because he's really not doing much the entire movie. He is locked in the other booth. Sometimes he'll go in and confront the alien, and then the alien will just get rid of him. You know, like, the alien doesn't seem particularly interested in people, to the point where, like, is there even a body count in this movie? I guess the cameraman in the beginning is the only one who doesn't come back.
Moon. Yeah, poor Moon. He's still, do you know what though? Fair play to him. He still manages to deliver those burgers.
He got him there. Absolutely. Yeah, he got those burgers there, you know? Like, yeah, he is seemingly the only actual casualty because everybody else comes, even Corky, who seemingly died, he comes out of a cocoon later in the movie and is just like, oh, I'm fine. So, like, this is not a particularly mean-spirited or disgusting full moon movie. You know, it's pretty light in terms of that.
Yeah, and there's some scantily clad people in it, but there's no nudity, which is,
No.
there's no like one of the hallmarks of a lot of these full moon movies is some gore practical effects and nudity, and you don't really get that here. I mean, most of the practical effect work you get here is just kind of like green sludge.
Right, yeah. Which likes to dance to the radio like in Ghostbusters 2, so I appreciated that. A little
Who can resist Jackie
fungus.
Wilson?
Oh, yeah, you can't do it. A little wriggling fungus. You know?
We get a Sonny Carl Davis appearance in this movie, as we do in a lot of full moon movies, obviously. And we talked about him in our Evil Bong episode and how he kind of comes back playing the character of Rabbit often in a bunch of different movies. You know what I noticed what I figured out he was from today? I did not do it the first movie or two we saw with him in it. He is the guy in Fast Times at Ridgemont High who gets Judge Reinhold fired. He is the guy who goes up and complains about his breakfast. He says, says 100% guarantee, you moron. He said something in this movie, and his cadence, all of a sudden, like a light bulb went off, and I'm like, I've heard this guy deliver lines like this before. Sure enough, I go back, and I'm like, I would have never in a million years made that connection based on him much older in Evil Bong than here. But no, Sonny Carl Davis, he's got that little...
I literally watched that movie this week and did not make the connection. Like, I watched that movie and then our next week's movie and this back to back, like 3 Sonny Carl Davis movies in a row, and I did not make that connection. That's a good call. Yeah, I don't know. He's definitely a band guy. Yeah, band just seems to be like titillated by this guy, and he's got kind of like a big goofy personality, and he's playing Peanut the Diner Owner here, who never really gets like too much to do, but gotta love just a guy named Peanut just in the movie.
You do, and it's sweet at the end when Cookie, the waitress, gets freed from her little jar.
Yeah,
he seems genuinely relieved that he's getting his sort of favorite waitress back at the truck stop. It's
Absolutely.
a sweet moment.
Yeah. It doesn't even feel super creepy. It feels like he's kind of a protective
at all.
big
It's pretty
brother
wholesome.
type. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a wholesomeness to this movie that is lacking in some of the other ones. Becky, I was going to say to you, if you had fun with this movie, you should definitely run, don't walk to check out a full moon movie called Shrunken Heads. If you haven't seen that movie, and then maybe do us a favor and listen to our episode on it with Grady Hendrix after, because it was a really great episode. Nice. But that movie is... I want to hand it over to you, Becky. What word do you think I'm looking for?
Is it mental?
Yes.
That movie is mental. If you feel like this movie has lots of what the fuck moments in it. But the thing about like Shrunken Heads is like Shrunken Heads goes dark at a time in the movie when you don't really expect it to. But I feel like it's sort of the same. It has a lot of the same energy where choices are made and things are happening. Like I would almost say like the Psychotic Symphony band performances are like not too far off. They share some DNA with the Elfman and Oingo Boingo type stuff. Like it's obviously a little bit later on. They're a little bit more like a Mr. Bungle or like a weird like funk metal-y kind of
like a proto Slipknot, but like
because they allegedly, from what Ted Nicolau said, didn't take their masks off.
Right. Yeah, he said like they were negotiating their contract for the movie, and like they were all in those masks the entire time.
Wow,
like, and the guy was wearing the cow
ripe.
udders. Right. Yeah. Oh my God, they must smell so bad.
But this movie is lighter than Shrunken Heads, and I think there's some actual like sweet moments in here, and I think the tone is kind of actually pitch perfect in the sense that you don't need to be afraid of these aliens. It's not really the point of this movie. The point
No.
of this movie is to kind of to give Ted Nicolau an excuse to direct some mock music videos and to get to to do kind of a fun reverse War of the Worlds situation involving this radio DJ. And I think, I don't know, I'm trying to imagine a version of this movie where there is a body count and where there is gore and there are these sort of like dark moments that go beyond creepy into unpleasant. And I just don't know if the movie would work if it veered that way.
No, I'll say it again. It's just like, I don't think people often appreciate how much intentionality goes into movies like this. I think the people making these movies are not stupid, and they're not delusional. They don't think they're making these great masterpieces with like perfect special effects and like amazing performances. Like they know what movie they're in, what movie they're making. And the best you can do sometimes, if that's your situation, if that's just the gig that you've got, is you have fun with it. And it feels like there's a lot of fun being had in this movie. It feels like everybody's kind of on the wavelength from what it's trying to do. And it does have some fun satirical elements, like you mentioned, like he's saying all these like sexual things, all these racist things, like he's saying all these nasty kind of things on his show. And the only time anybody actually gets offended or like is when he says fuck.
Yeah.
And that's such like a keen observation too. Like, just in my own personal experience, my parents would let me watch like the most violent stuff possible. Like they didn't really care about like on screen like gunfights and like Rambo stuff like that. But if there was swear words or if there was a sex scene, they made me turn it off. Like that's where they drew the line, and I'm like, I feel like our priorities are out of whack.
That's so common. I think that's really classic, and it comes down to. We spend a lot of time with the news in this film.
Yeah.
And you think about the type of stuff that people see on the news on a day-to-day basis, crime and war and violence. And, this is an age-old argument. This isn't a hot take. But, you drop the F-bomb and all of a sudden people are, sort of up on their chairs with like clutching their pearls. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, suddenly he's gone too far. He's describing an alien invasion and like women being kidnapped and tortured, and but nope, he dropped an F-bomb, and he's just like, well, I knew this was the only way I was going to get your attention and get you to take me seriously. Which I think is just a funny point. But
well, yeah, there's a little bit of subversion in there, and it's got the news segment too. I mean, okay, maybe this movie isn't RoboCop, but it's saying something and using some of the same devices in kind of a cheeky way. And maybe there's something to be said too about the casting of Martha Quinn, maybe a sort of an ironic casting as having her play this credulous reporter in the movie. Maybe that was intentional, other than just her being somebody that they thought of when they thought the idea of music videos would permeate the finished product here. That I don't know. I'm going to maybe read a little more into it. Again, like you mentioned before, Steve, it was really interesting how little of this was written about. I had a Mandela effect where I went back to it came from the video aisle and was flipping through trying to find the segment that was about bad channels. And I'm like flipping through, and I found one sentence that just says that the characters, there was a plan to have them appear again in Dollman versus Demonic Toys from Ted Nicolau's Bad Channels, and that was it. And I could not, it's not a franchise, so it wasn't in the franchise section, and there really wasn't a whole lot to say about it. And yeah, maybe Ted Nicolau was reluctant, and he brought a workmanlike approach to this one, as opposed to, we've covered some of the Subspecies movies, which really are his babies, and it's like those, you can tell like he really wants to tell the story a certain way, and he's super duper involved in his vision coming forward. I don't know that I could say I feel like he had a true vision here other than to have fun, but I think he does it in an amiable way, and he's obviously a very skilled person. And we've watched a number of movies that he's directed, a number of movies that he's edited. And so even when he's sort of phoning it in, for lack of a better phrase, he's still putting out something with some energy and some spunk to it, I think.
Absolutely. Well, that was kind of about everything I had about Bad Channels. Do we have any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
So, Becky, I'll hand it over to you because if I'm being completely honest, part of me was thinking you were going to join onto this meeting. You were going to look us dead in the eye and say, "Why did you make me do this?"
I'm so sorry to disappoint you by enjoying this movie.
Oh, no, trust me, you did not disappoint me. It is very much the opposite. But there was a part of me that was a little worried that was going to happen. And so I was worried that like we were going to have to pry a little bit to get you to say some complimentary things about it. So now that you have seen this movie and now that you have, learned a little bit more about a full moon and gotten some context and stuff for it, I'm just curious, like when you walk away from this now, like how would you describe this movie to someone else? Like if you're like, I watched this movie, bad channels and blank, and feel free to say mental as many times as you want.
I should also say that in kind of in British parlance, if we're saying mental, it's not kind of being derogatory to anybody with,
of course,
mental health issues.
Of course.
It's very much talking about kind of a vibe and a kind of craziness about an energy to a movie. And I think this lives up to that. It's really kind of, it's chaotic in terms of its like approach to the subject matter. I think like it's frenetic and it's good fun. And I didn't know what to expect. And I did kind of come in sort of thinking, right, it's a low budget direct to video movie about aliens ? That take over a radio station to kidnap women and put them in jars. Like,
well, when you say it like that,
right? What has this got in store for me? And like, we're recording on a Sunday. I watched it this afternoon before we hit record, and it was like a really solid like Sunday afternoon watch. As you've already alluded to, like, it doesn't have a high body count. There's not loads of gore, although obviously we all watch stuff that's got high body counts and loads of gore on Sunday afternoon anyway.
Oh, yeah.
But this definitely feels like one of those kind of Sunday afternoon films that you can sort of chuck on and just sort of kick back and enjoy. Like, I thought that I really liked the way, as I said at the beginning, that it felt like people were taking it seriously in terms of the production, despite its kind of irreverent tone. And it didn't feel like people were phoning it in. It felt like they were committed. I enjoyed the performances. I thought it was very silly, but like in the good way. And yeah, like I was very, very pleasantly surprised.
That's sort of the hallmark of the best stuff of the classic full moon era. Like, I think the way that you just described this, like, that's kind of how all the best stuff from Full Moon that came out during those early Paramount years, I think could be described that way. Because I know you were on, I believe it was an episode of Brain Rot with, Stevie Webb, who was he's been with us too on the show and did Killjoy, a fantastic episode. And you guys watched, I believe it was one of the Extra sequels.
Oh my God, Extra 3.
Yeah, and this movie is like Citizen Kane compared to Extra 3.
Absolutely.
It's so true. Although saying that, we also loved Extra 3. It's oddly charming, and that is a way that I would also describe bad channels.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's, it's fungus and like women gyrating around diners and kind of sort of controversial light shock jock, and not a lot of kind of visual prowess, let's put it that way.
Right.
But it's got an odd charm to it, and I had a really good time with it.
Yeah.
Well, and we had a really good time talking to you about it. Thank you so much
you.
for agreeing to come on the show and taking a chance on this goofy movie with us. Can you tell our listeners where they might find you if they want to hear more of your stuff, read more of your stuff, or just generally follow up on your life?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. So I'm on Twitter. I'm still calling it Twitter. I don't care.
Yes.
I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Bunny Darke. So that's BUNNYDARKE. And I basically link to everything that I do on both of those platforms. So I write for the Arrow video blog. I write for Games Radar. And I podcast a lot with Mike Munzer over at the Evolution of Horror. I have my own podcast, which is about the very silly little 90s paperbacks, point horror books. And we've got another, I don't know when this episode with you guys is coming out, but we've got another episode coming out for Christmas, so you can keep your eyes peeled for that. I'm always busy. There's always something where I'm sort of forcing myself into people's social media stuff. So yeah, just follow me and you can keep up with everything.
Awesome. And if you want to keep up with us and know what we're doing and show us some love, you can jump on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you're listening to the show. Drop us a 5-star rating and maybe a brief review if you are so inclined. If you want to follow the show on Instagram, you can at puppetmasters_castlefreaks. You can follow me on my personal account at _Giallo_Jerry or Steve at Minotaur Matador. You can also find the show on YouTube, on X, on Blue Sky, on Threads, and we try to keep up at least putting out promo posts for each new episode on those, but look forward to some more content coming out in the future. But not only Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks content as it pertains to Steve. Steve, you've got something else going on. Why don't you tell our listeners what that is?
I do. I'm also the co-host of the show Cinema Arcade, and that's the show where we are watching movies and then playing the video games based on it to see how those two medias enhance or detract from one another's messages.
Oh my God, that sounds awesome.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's so fun. It's so fun. As of this recording, we would have just wrapped up our entire month of Christmas movies / Christmas games. So we talked about The Polar Express and Elf and both Home Alones and Die Hard. So we had a lot of fun talking about all of those, and we're going to have a lot of weird ones coming up in January and beyond. So check that out wherever you find your podcasts. And as for us, you'll want to check back in next week because we've got another double header for you. We are talking about 2 movies, as we usually do when we cover some of the longer full moon franchises. We are returning to our old buddy Jack Death to talk about Trancers 2 and Trancers 3. Very fun conversation with Eric Hansen from the Cradle to the Grave podcast. We had a lot of fun breaking those down. So you'll hear that episode next week.
I love Eric.
Oh, he's such a sweetheart.
Eric.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a great guest, and I know, Becky, you and we were also on the Best of 84. We talked about, you did Children of the Corn, I believe. We did Friday the 13th for the final chapter, and I'm sure that we'll be bumping into each other again on Cradle to the Grave as at some other point in the Best of the 80s episodes. But yeah, Eric is terrific, and that show is terrific, and all of the work that you do. I'm such a fan of all the different podcasts and things that you've been involved in that I've heard. And so I'm so glad we finally got to make this happen. And you were nice enough to take a chance on this bonkers movie and come and talk to us. And so listeners, stick with us and stay tuned next week for Trancers 2, The Return of Jack Death, and Trancers 3, Death Lives.
Don't touch that dial. DJ voice.
All right, that's a good place to stop.
Before that probably would have been a good place
Nope.
for me to stop.
No, we want that.
Before
we
I
want
did that stupid voice.
Hey kids, it's the Captain Happy Show starring me, Captain Happy. Let me get out my magic mirror. I see Bobby, I see Susie, I see Billy. Filled with joy this time of season, I'm always happy for no reason. The big red sun shining down on me, the sweet little birds give a melody. I love